name is Don Cottle. I was a photographer's mate second class with the United States Navy from March 1951 to March 1955.
I'm speaking with Don Cottle, who served 4 years as a Navy photographer on the aircraft carrier USS Rendova, which participated in the Korean War with Marine Fighter Squadron VMF 212. However, today I will be interviewing him about his experience helping photograph the first hydrogen bomb test on November 1st, 1952. It was called Operation Ivy. He also happens to be my father. So talk to me about the time frame that you were informed your ship was participating in nuclear tests on Enewetak Atoll in the Marshall Islands.
Well, we had spent the last 6 months of 1951 off the north coast of North Korea with the Marine Fighter Squadron. Our job at that time was close air defense. And then we returned to the United States at the very end of 1951, fortunately in time for Christmas. And we went into Long Beach Naval Shipyard for routine maintenance. And it was shortly after we arrived back in the States, the chief of our photo lab called a meeting of all the photographers. And I think our division officer might have been there too, because he usually attended important meetings. So the chief told us that we would be participating in nuclear tests late in 1952, and that the lab would be considered top secret because we were going to have the photographers from Los Alamos, New Mexico on board, and that they would be using our photo lab and our equipment. And he did not mention that it was a first hydrogen bomb test because President Truman was keeping that very quiet. And so they did say that our main job would be to assist the photographers from Los Alamos for anything that they wanted done, and that they would have complete use of our photo lab. They also told us that since the lab was going to be classified top secret, that all the photographers had to clear security clearance and be able to be classed for top secret, otherwise we couldn't go on the cruise.
And what was your title? What was your rank?
I was a photographer's mate second class.
Okay.
So I'm supposed to say that at the beginning. So another thing he said was that they told us that the lab would be a whole new ballgame, that there were going to be some very strict controls, that we would have to account for every sheet of photographic paper, every piece of film would have a number, and we'd have a log that we would have to log in anytime we used any items, and we couldn't throw away anything. We'd have to keep it and prove that that piece of paper was used for that particular purpose. So that was a total change in what we had been used to in the lab, because the photographers could use any of the equipment and any of the supplies anytime we wanted. But that was going to be a new situation. So fortunately, I did clear security for top secret, and all of my colleagues also passed for top secret. So they told us that we were going to be leaving late that summer. So I had a period of about 5 or 6 months after we went in for routine maintenance where we just really didn't have much to do. So they sent me to photographic interpretation school, where we'd learn how to do detailed analysis of aerial photographs. And so that I was supposed to have those skills when we went back to Korea. We were scheduled to return in late 1953, and as fate would have it, the peace treaty was enacted in July of 1953, so we no longer needed the skills that I just had gone to school for. So I guess that pretty much brings up what I was feeling and how they notified us at that point in time.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think your aircraft carrier was selected?
It was a good question. actually, two reasons. It seems sort of odd that why would you need an aircraft carrier at a nuclear test? And number one, we had a very fully equipped photo lab. And number two, we were going to have a Marine helicopter squadron on board. And one of the tasks of the helicopter squadron would be to ferry the scientists and the photographers from Los Alamos to and from the ship to the island where the test was going to be. And they were going to put cameras and scientific equipment in surrounding adjacent islands. So they would ferry them back and forth for that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So it was essential to have an aircraft carrier for the helicopters and for the photo lab.
So tell me what it was like to experience the blast.
Well, it was really quite amazing, actually. The ship was 30 miles from ground zero, and the device was actually not dropped from an airplane because it was too heavy and too large. They said that it weighed 144,000 pounds, and there was an additional 25,000 pounds of refrigeration equipment, and it was like 10 feet wide by 20 feet high, so obviously couldn't drop that from an airplane. So the technology was pretty primitive in those days. They were using something heavy hydrogen called liquid deuterium. And the reason for the refrigeration equipment, the deuterium had to be cooled to minus 424 degrees, and it had to be kept at that temperature in order for the fusion to actually take place. So the device itself had a trigger, which was an atomic device, fission, like the bombs that were dropped during World War II. And the fuel for the device was the liquid deuterium. So that's pretty much, it was a very large.
Yeah, so
let's see what else.
Talk more about the experience of being there, the blast.
The blast itself, well, that was an amazing experience, really. The blast was, number one, they weren't even sure if it was going to work or not because it was a science that was theoretical. It did work. And it turned out it was approximately, they said, between 600 and 700 times more powerful than the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan during World War II.
Wow.
And they initially thought it was about 12 megatons. The final number was 10.4 megatons. That's the equivalent of 10 million pounds explosives of TNT.
Wow.
Excuse me, I said that wrong. That's the equivalent of 10 million tons of TNT, 10 megatons.
Wow.
So it's really a massive explosion. I think the most shocking thing of all, however, was the island where the blast took place literally disappeared. And it left a marine crater 6,280 feet long, 164 feet deep. So it was, and it literally destroyed all the wildlife and foliage of all the surrounding islands because of the intense heat. The mushroom cloud reached 135,000 feet, and that's more than 25 miles high, so that is really a massive cloud. And the stem reached 20 miles wide stem of the mushroom cloud. So it's really quite a view.
Wow, that's incredible.
We were told that, by the way, all these details that we were sworn to secrecy for our entire lives. We could never discuss this. And of course, 10 or 15 years later, it was all released in the public. So,
yeah. So you obviously saw the mushroom cloud, but did you feel or hear anything? What was that like?
Well, the mushroom cloud obviously was pretty amazing. Frankly, I was terrified. I was given a set of goggles that you could look at the sun and you would see absolutely nothing. And when the blast happened, it was just this massive explosion. It was almost like looking at the sun with no goggles.
Wow.
So it was pretty astounding. And I was my heart must have been beating 140 or 50 beats a minute. I was really terrified, frankly, because we didn't know how big it was going to be, didn't know if it was going to work, all of those things. And so I was very nervous, obviously. In terms of heat, if you think about at the center of that blast, the heat was generated tens of millions of degrees of electromagnetic heat dispersed instantaneously. So even though we were 30 miles away, we definitely felt some heat. Not enough to burn you or anything, but I definitely felt some heat. And sound, yes, did hear the sound. They told us that a blast of this magnitude, that we should be able to hear it as far as 100 miles away. At 30 miles, we did hear it. It took about 2.5 minutes for the sound to reach us. And it was not a very loud sound, but you could definitely tell it was an explosion. So we did have the heat, we did have the sound, but the most incredible thing was the massive flash of that power, knowing what it was doing.
Yeah. So what was your role in helping photograph this world-changing event?
Well, I was assigned a camera. It was on a tripod. We were on the flight deck. They had several cameras set up across the flight deck, and I had a very routine kind of camera. I was told to, as soon as I heard the final countdown on the ship's loudspeaker system, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, to start taking pictures. And my heart was pounding, and I do remember at least having the sense to start pulling the trigger. But the photographers from Los Alamos, in addition to the cameras that they had in the surrounding islands, they did have some cameras on board on the flight deck. And they had cameras that were not the normal cameras that you would think of, but cameras that would capture part of the electromagnetic spectrum, things that the human eye can't see, like X-rays, gamma rays, microwaves, ultraviolet, infrared, etc. Now, that sort of thing wouldn't mean much to anybody, like wasn't a trained physicist looking at it, but that gives a lot of detail on what was actually going on internally and during that exposure. So those cameras captured that sort of thing.
So talk about there was a window of time after the blast that the Los Alamos photographers had to go retrieve the equipment. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, very shortly after the blast, they told them they had 1 hour to get in and get out, and they were going to retrieve all the film from the surrounding cameras and the printed data from scientific instruments. So this is where the role of our helicopters played. And so I watched the photographers from Los Alamos get on the planes and fly off to sea. And of course, everybody was curious. At that time, we didn't know that the island had disappeared. And so that was the first indication we'd had. We knew how powerful it was just from looking at the explosion. But so.
Did you ever get to see any of the photographs or any of the data after the bomb happened?
Well, unfortunately, basically no, because the data was beyond top secret. There are clearances above top secret, so all that data was pretty much gathered to take back to Los Alamos. However, we did see one thing. They did develop a couple of there were glass slides with just sort of black and white slide indications of slides, which would indicate the X-rays, gamma rays, etc. But only a trained physicist would understand what that means. So I didn't get a chance to see a couple of those. But,
so you witnessed the destructive power of this bomb. How do you think that experience affected you?
Well, number one, I thought, knowing the destructive power of this, I was hoping that mankind would have enough sense to never, ever think about using nuclear weapons in a war. There was a phrase that was coined in the 1960s called mutually assured destruction. I think I would modify that to say mutually assured destruction of mankind, because I am pretty convinced that if we had a full-out nuclear exchange between Russia or China and the United States, that I don't believe mankind would survive. So I was thinking to myself that later, thinking about anything that could make an island disappear and leave a crater more than a mile wide and 164 foot deep. I can't even imagine what would happen if some weapon of that magnitude was dropped on a city. And it's really terrifying to even think about it. So my hope is that the leaders of our country and Russia and China and our potential adversaries would have enough sense to never ever use nuclear weapons.
Wow. So, what would you tell young people today who are thinking about joining the military?
Number one, I would say yes, joy is an incredible experience. I think, first place, these are not in any order of priority, but I was thinking it's an opportunity to give something back to your country for all the things that you receive as an American citizen and for the price that other veterans have paid for your freedom. I think also it's a great opportunity to learn some leadership skills and develop better decision-making process, to learn about some responsibility. And I think a chance to develop a skill or a trade that you could use in civilian life if you don't stay in the service, or if you stay in, have a very fulfilling career and a pension. And I would say that if you plan to go to college, this is where I have some real personal experience. I think if you delay going to college, instead of going right from high school to college, and you have some time in the service, you'll have a much better understanding of your place in the world, and I think more focus, and you'll appreciate your education more. In fact, if you go to college after the service, you'll be miles ahead of your classmates who haven't been, and don't have the maturity. And I can speak from personal experience on this one because I was really bored with high school. I did not want to go to college, and even with my parents insisting that I go to college. But after serving for 4 years and seeing the value of an education and the difference between officers and enlisted men, when I got out of the service, I was really dedicated, and I went to University of California, Santa Barbara, got my bachelor's degree, and I studied very hard, and I really enjoyed what I was doing. But because of my maturity, I did well enough that I got a full scholarship for 2 years at Harvard Business School so I could get my MBA degree, which I did. So because of that, I'm eternally grateful for what the Navy did for me. So that's my story. So,
It's a good one, Dad. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to do this today. I really appreciate it. I want to ask if anybody has any questions. Yes, Brad.
When you said the islands appeared, maybe I missed it because I'm at that, but what did that do to the ocean? Tsunami effect at all? Were there waves?
well, that's a good question. I can't really answer it firsthand because we were 30 miles away, but I did hear that some of the fish were blown out of the water and had their skin burned off on one side. So you can imagine what that must have done to leave a crater 164 feet deep. It must have definitely caused some massive amount of the water moving away from the explosion. I never heard anything that would verify how much of that was, but I think that's a good question. It probably did.
How could it not? Right? How could it not?
Yes. How could it not?
Yeah. 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 Go ahead, Julie.
Hi, fascinating story. Thank you for sharing this daughter-father thing. It's
Mother.
really awesome.
Hold on,
I was
girl.
curious to know what kind of camera you used and if any of your photos were, or the photos of your fellow photographers were published in print, or if that was held as a top secret and maybe later.
Well, I had a camera that had roll of film that took images 4 by 5 inches, and I just pulled the trigger, and so it advances the film. I never saw the developed film, so I really can't say. And there were numerous different types of cameras that took black and white and color film. We never got to see any of those images. I'm sure that some of the images that some of the Navy photographers took, and certainly the ones that the photographers from Los Alamos took, I'm sure some of those ended up being published, but we would never know if that was something that we were responsible for, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And what kind of camera was it?
K-25, it was a Navy camera with a camera crank. It had one of the Navy cameras that they used for widespread general use. Some of the photographers had speed graphics and movie cameras. So everybody had different assignments. And none of us were using the cameras that were the more exotic cameras that took the visible spectrum, or the super high-speed cameras that would give you very slow motion. We didn't operate those cameras.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for your story. It really is fascinating. And I'm trying to imagine what an island disappearing looks like, or feels like. But
Right.
was there a lot of equipment, collection equipment that just got destroyed that you didn't expect, or that they did not expect it would have been missed?
Well, the island where the blast took place, I saw pictures of the structure that held the device, the 20-foot, 10-foot wide, and it looked like a barn, and it was maybe about 40 feet high, and they had balconies around it, and then off of the structure itself, they had the refrigerated equipment, and then there was a long tunnel to adjacent islands where I'm not sure the technology was needed, but there was something to measure. They had helium balloons in that tunnel, and it measured some sort of ray that was given off of the device. But there was a lot of equipment on the island. So not only did the island disappear, but all of that equipment completely vaporized. Nothing left. As I said earlier, there was literally tens of millions of degree heat generated at the center of that explosion.
It's crazy. Julie?
What was the retaliation or reaction from the enemy after the bomb?
Well, it was really interesting. It took place, it was 7:15 in the morning. I remember that very well, November 1st. And the United States was having an election 3 or 4 days later. I'm not
How
sure
convenient.
the coincidence, but Harry Truman pushed these to make sure that the deadline was November 1st, and we absolutely had to make that deadline. And I'm sure that the Russians were definitely surprised that we had accomplished something that was considered theoretically possible, but nobody knew if it could really happen. So,
Did we have a reaction from Russia that you know of?
not that I know of. I mean,
Yeah.
other than the normal, I'm sure that
Posturing?
they probably gathered together all of their physicists and said, "Get to work,
Get on it.
get to work," and they're starting their espionage,
Yeah.
taking
Counterintelligence. Yeah.
And incidentally, subsequently to this test, Russia eventually detonated the largest device that's ever been detonated ever on the planet. It was in the Arctic. It was 50 megatons, and it did damage 170 miles away from the blast. It was unbelievably
Destructive. Yeah.
Yes. And so let's just hope that we have the sense never to use these weapons.
Yeah. Brad, you had another question?
Yeah, the sign of that device fascinates me, and I'm just wondering, yeah, you know, how they were planning to use it. And you haul something around and bomb people with something so.
A building.
Was there any talk about what's, you know, later on, how to use it?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
What'd you say, 140,000? You could drop it from a
Well,
plane, so how would you use it?
Well, actually, this was just the very preliminary design, and we used in this device. They used the liquid deuterium, and subsequently they were able to develop something called lithium-6, which could be in a solid form. It didn't have to be liquid and frozen at that minus 424. You could have never developed a deliverable weapon if you had to keep things at minus 424 degrees. And so they did eventually get it so it was solid state, non-liquid, and in much more compact form. So the bombs are definitely deliverable today. And they have different size weapons. They have artillery shells, rockets that are tipped with explosive nuclear weapons, and traditional bombs that could be dropped from an airplane. But most in a nuclear exchange of the future, most of it would not be delivered by airplanes. It would be missiles with tips that are hydrogen bomb tips. And
So the nuclear weapons today stem directly from that test. I imagine they're much more powerful today.
this was a baby compared to what they can do now. And so if you think about the comparison, this being a very small scale compared to what they could do today, if this baby device made an island disappear and do that much damage, just imagine what they could do today with these weapons. It's unimaginable. It really is.
Bruce?
Were there other islands close by, and what kind of destruction did it give those islands?
Well, actually, Enoweek Atoll is 20 miles long and it curves. The island where the blast took place was at one end. We were about 10 miles south of the southernmost island on the tip. And so the atoll is a chain of islands. On the very bottom island, there was a large military base, an airfield, and a place where we could go when the ship was anchored. We could go on shore and use the facilities there. And on some of the closer islands, of course, just demolished all of the wildlife, and the foliage, of course, was burned off to the closer islands. I didn't get a chance to see that, but we heard that from the surveys that were made. And of course, they took pictures of all of that. That was all documented and sent back to Los Alamos. But you can imagine the heat in those islands that would be closer to the actual island where the blast took place. It would have been pretty intense heat and pretty total destruction.
Would plant life grow there now?
Actually, Mother Nature is pretty resilient. Yes, a lot of it grew back. Some of the area is still highly radioactive. The radiation, unfortunately, has a very long half-life, and some of the radiation takes thousands of years before it's really safe to go back to. But many of the islands that we did a lot of testing in the South Pacific, and many of the islands where tests were taking place, people are now living either nearby or on the islands.
Sue?
Is there a simplified version of the difference between the atomic bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and a hydrogen bomb? Is that something you could explain in simplified words?
Sure, I think so. An atomic bomb is fission, where they're actually taking atoms and exploding them, and they use uranium, enriched uranium, whereas a hydrogen bomb is actually fusing hydrogen atoms together. And it takes, as I understand it, it takes intense heat to do the acute fusion process. That's why they use an atomic weapon, a fission weapon, as the trigger, and the hydrogen is the fuel. And that intense heat of millions of degrees from the atomic explosion enables the atoms of hydrogen to fuse together. So it's fusion versus fission. So it's atoms exploding in the case of an atomic bomb versus merging or fusing atoms together to develop a hydrogen bomb. Does that help?
Yes.
Julie.
Are you keeping up or have any interest in the new, newly discovered fusion or fission? I'm sorry, my ignorance, but there's been some new discoveries in nuclear fusion.
Yes, hopefully, if we're ever able to harness the technology, this would be an unlimited source of power. We would no longer be relying on fossil fuels. With just a literal unlimited amount of supply of power for mankind. Unfortunately, because of the massive amount of energy that's required to fuse atoms together to release that power, it was only until very recently Livermore Laboratories in California was able with an array of very high intense laser beams focused on numerous laser beams focused on these atoms. They were able to actually create fusion, but it was very, very limited, fraction of a second what they were able to fuse. And so they have a long way to go before we would unleash this source of power. But they're working on it, and maybe in 10, 20 years, we might be able to have sustained fusion, and then that would be an incredible breakthrough for mankind.
Any other questions?
I have one for you guys. So is this going to be dual purpose, where you're going to be, where it's going to be a standard 2.5 minute visual best, and so in that case, do I need to reframe to match the source photograph? Take you take like a nature, like, hi, my name is
Yeah.
up here. Yeah.
I'd like for him to read. We missed that section where he does the intro. Do you
Right.
think I could have him read that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's what I'm
Will you
asking.
do the I am Don Cottle?
Yeah.
I was a Navy photographer. Yeah, let's do that. So you'll just say, I am Don Cottle. Yeah.
Sure. And she's not going to, Corinne's not going to be on camera for this portion. Is that correct? Because I need to get a plate of the background before I forget, so that I can pop up my ad. That's got my tripod showing up in the corner, but
Anything else that you felt you wanted to? Anything else you felt you wanted to?
What is your thinking? I think
I think it was great. I think it was good.
okay. You know, do any of it over?
Just the intro part.
Yeah, I don't think I was following your instruction of looking at the cameras.
it's okay. It looks fine. It's close enough. I think it looks fine. It looks natural. It's like documentary style.
Okay.
It's fun. But for this part, if you would look directly at the camera, and yeah, you're right.
My name is Don Cottle. I was a photographer's mate second class in the United States Navy.
Do we want to have more information with that, like when?
Oh,
Do you want to have that be part of the intro?
Would that be good?
Okay, let's do that over.
Yeah, start over and just say just add a time frame.
okay. My name is Don Cottle. I was a photographer's mate second class in the United States Navy from March 1951 to March 1955.
Yeah, you can one more time, please.
Okay. My name is Don Cottle. I was a photographer's mate second class in the United States Navy from March 1951 to March 1955.
Yeah.
Is that good, Bert?
Is that a wrap? Okay.
You okay with it?
Were you gonna talk about the photo that he's holding in the picture?
It's a
Well,
it's a photo.
when we were gonna do a voiceover on that.
And that photo is not germane to the interview. It's just because it had the restricted top secret information on the back is why we used that particular photo. It's one of the planes crashing off of the aircraft carrier.
Yeah, it was a plane.
Another story.
Nothing to do with it. Nothing to do with the test.
Yeah.
So were there any photos that we're gonna use in the video that he can talk about?
I have no idea.
I don't think we've drilled down and chosen any of the ones that we've got the certificate, which is anything, anytime. We've got the digital pictures of the before and after of the island.
You saw they said 10 seconds. They told us 3 or 4 seconds. And so I kept mine out about 2 or 3 seconds and took it off.
Not significant.
I'm not sure that's important, but
Yeah. Oops.
What did that do to the film that was rolling? Did that
Good question.
ruin that film, that portion of it?
well, what it was, it has a arm trigger. You pull it, and every time you pull it, it opens the shutter and closes it. And open, close it.
No, he's asking about the flash itself, what effect that might have on the film. Those few pictures that were being taken, yeah.
Since I didn't see the results, I have no idea. I'm sure some of the cameras that Los Alamos brought had filters to take care of that.
Okay.
Yeah. They had some very exotic cameras that I'd never seen before. And, cameras, for example, that would take film at thousands of frames per second. And of course, when you played that back, it was extreme slow motion. And the cameras that took parts of the electromagnetic spectrum.
I have one more question. How old were you when you witnessed this hydrogen bomb test?
Yeah, it was 1952. I would have been 20. Yeah, 20 years old.
Just recovered much.
What now?
That was 91. 91
We
now.
all look screen now.
Good genes.
Is there any part of that? I sort of stumbled in the beginning here. Is there some of this that we should do over again? Is it all right?
It's up to you. I don't recall stumbling.
It probably
If you
felt
feel
like.
like you did. If you'd like to restate something, you're welcome to.
Let me just look and see if there's any. No, I don't know. I think you reminded me by asking me some questions. And
Were you okay with that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
We're
I
good.
think if you use some of the original footage where the actual explosion and showing the helicopters leaving the flight deck of our ship with the photographers, that would be really useful, I think. And I think those 2 pictures, the digital pictures of the aerial pictures of the before and after showing the crater, that would be, I think, very powerful.
Yeah, we'll just send as much stuff as we can, and
I'll send the certificate I have with that I participated in. I don't know if that's.
Yeah. I think everything would be great.
Yeah.
I'm the one who
doing it.
edits it. Yeah.
Is there anything on your ribbons that you wanted to talk about, your medals, your ribbons?
No, not really. It was just the normal stuff. I guess one of the ones I'm proud of is a commendation ribbon, but these are national defense and good conduct, etc.
What's the one? Accommodation?
That's the green one.
And what is that for?
Was a letter of commendation from this captain of the ship on the second cruise that we went to Korea after the Korean War was over. I put together a cruise book for of everything we had done on the cruise, every place we'd been, we were in Hong Kong and Korea, Japan, etc., and produced that for the crew. And so the captain gave me a letter of commendation.
Nice.
It goes in your permanent
Record.
file.
Mhm.
The other things were just for having served in Korea, I served in a combat area, and for good conduct and United Nations defense and Korean service and Korean defense. Those are all the different ribbons. So
Nice.
proud of those.
Yeah.
After your service, did you pursue a career or a hobby in photography?
Actually, no. I went to Harvard Business School, got my MBA, and at that time, afterwards I worked for some large companies but I did, keep up the hobby. But I thought sort of vaguely about maybe a professional career. And I interviewed a couple of companies, including one that specialized in aerial photography. But I just thought that I'd better stick with what I had really been trained to do. And so I worked I had sort of an eclectic career, worked for Dun& Bradstreet. I was in the advertising business. I was in the real estate development business for a while. And I also was in a children's book publishing business. So, as I said, it was a very eclectic career, but it was very interesting.
Well, and I will
And the
tell
last-
you, there are boxes of slides of every horrible moment that I ever experienced. And my brother.
In the last 23 years of my career, I was a consultant, coaching CEOs. And I worked until I was 79 because I loved what I was doing. And so no reason to retire. And so the last 23 years were really kind of interesting and exciting and rewarding. But, so I retired at 79. I'm 91 now and planning on being around for the next 15 years or so.
Yeah, like a 91-year-old ever.
I know, right?
But I still, with having an iPhone 14 with all the bells and whistles, it sort of spoils you, compared to the old days of being in the dark room and wondering if this negative is really going to come out, and holding it up and hoping. So, but it's a marvelous avocation. I've got something like 40,000 pictures on my
Yes.
computer at home, and that's after getting rid of many, many. I also belong to something called the National Association of Naval Photographers, and we have annual meetings. I don't always go to all of them, but it's interesting to sort of spend time with guys who did the same thing that I did in the Navy and the same thing that your father did. And and we have a website so we can post pictures of things that we do. In fact, the last convention I went to was in Pensacola, and it was the celebration of the Blue Angels, and they put on a performance for us. It was just unbelievable. I mean, I'd seen the Blue Angels before, but this was a special performance that they were doing for the National Association of Naval Photographers, and it was pretty special. Amazing. That was 2 years ago.
Okay. All right.